Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and I've got Reed Little from the Contrarians back to the channel. Good morning, Reed. How are you going?
Good morning, Peter. Glad to be here as always. Thank you for inviting me.
Not a problem. Today we are going to do an episode on the Please Forgive Me album. Now, the concept of this show is quite simple. A rock band, or it could be a solo artist, has put out an album and it's either commercially or critically flopped. And the next album that they've had to put out is Let's Get Back to the Old Audience. Please forgive me. So all genres, all eras. Reed, what's your first Please Forgive Me album?
Okay, so I'm going to start with a classic, one of my particular favorite artists of all time, and that's going to be Ronnie James Dio with his solo band. So, like so many heavy metal artists, in the 90s, Dio was kind of wandering in the wilderness. And, kind of the general narrative of the 90s is that grunge came along and killed heavy metal, which is vastly oversimplified because, of course, heavy metal was huge in the 90s. It was just a very different kind of heavy metal than was big in the 1980s. And the traditional artists from the 80s really struggled to find an audience. And if you go back to listen to interviews with Ronnie Dio, who was always a very eloquent speaker, he used to give interviews talking about Tool and Napalm Death and these really heavy bands and how he thought he needed to be heavier. And so he got Tracy G and he put out Strange Highways, which was an album that I love, although it was very divisive. And then he put out the follow-up album, Angry Machines. And I don't know very many people that love this album at all. Now, there are a couple of tracks on this album that I think are quite good, but on the whole, I rank this album right down at the bottom of the Dio catalog. If you can say that any Dio album is phoned in, this is the album that is phoned in. If you read Martin Popoff's book on Dio, there are a couple of songs where they were literally just like, hey, Jeff Pilson, have you got anything at all? Because we are 2 tracks short. And they were just literal filler songs, man. I mean, that's the nadir of a band when you are just struggling to fill up album tracks. Now, that isn't to say it's completely worthless. Like I said, there are a couple of songs on here that I really like. I like Institutional Man, the opening track. I think that's a really good one. I think Double Monday's a good song. Hunter of the Heart's a pretty good track. But there are some songs on there that I'm not fond of at all, and I think it's a weak album. Now, after that, though, Tracy G is out. He gets Craig Goldie back, and he puts out a very traditional Dio album. Now, Ronnie, again, being a very well-spoken, a very eloquent man, he would really take issue with the idea that this was any sort of apology album. But let's face it, Ronnie had put out 2 very, very different, very attempt to be 90s albums. And now he was going back and putting out a very traditional, very early 80s kind of album with Magica. And I must say, for me, this is a love it and hate it album. I hate the interstitial material. I hate the robot voices. I hate I'm sorry, Ronnie was not an author. His story that he wrote to go with this album is just, it's so terrible. It's something that, I might have written in 7th grade. I love you, Ronnie. You were a terrible author. But I love the music. I love the songs. I love the playing. It has some wonderful songs on it. And when I burned off this CD, this was the song that I actually learned how to use. Now I can't remember what the name of the editing suite is, but so that I could take it and edit off those stupid robot voices from the end of the songs and just have the music. Because of what is love? Who is love? Oh, that just bugs me every time I hear it. It kills my enjoyment of it. But once you get rid of all of that stupidity, there's a wonderful album here, a wonderful album of very traditional Dio songs. And I really think this was his attempt to bring the traditional Dio fan back into the fold and say, hey, I'm sorry for trying to be Tool. We're not Tool, we're Dio, and we're back in the traditional heavy metal game.
Great example there. I mean, Ronnie is known for a couple of classic periods, Rainbow, Black Sabbath, and those first couple of Dio albums. That's the classic sound. And for him to change his sound to move with the times would have been a dramatic seismic shift for his fan base. So you can't help but not think that that album was the apology album. Let's get things back to basics. And there are so many heritage artists or classic artists that have done exactly the same. So that's a great example. One little tidbit that I want to bring up is I agree with you. I don't like these concept or pseudo concept albums where they have spoken word in between songs. Queens of the Stone Age had an album which was loosely based on a Mexican radio station, and they'd have all these little bit of narrative. I love the Queens of the Stone Age, rocking songs, but the momentum be spoiled by all these little narratives. And Prince was guilty. He did an album called The Gold Experience. Great album, all these great songs, but it had this narrative in between each of the songs, and it just spoils it. And you just want to fast forward it. So anyway, that's a super pick. All right, I'm going to go with Metallica. Metallica is a classic test case of an apology album. So the early Metallica story. They had the uber hit in 1991 with the Black Album, which just sold a ton of records. I think it's one of the biggest selling heavy metal albums of all time. It must be nudging back in Black, Reed. It's way up there. And then in the 90s, they cut their hair. The sound got a little bit less metal and more rock. And they explored it with Load in 96 and Reload in 97. A lot of experimental things were happening, completely polar opposite to those early thrash years where they were just phonetic and thrashy, and it was, kind of really edgy. Then the nadir in my opinion, of the Metallica albums was St. Anger, that horrible album of 2003, where it was just songs that had no lead breaks. You had the worst drum sound committed to tape in the history of rock and roll music. It's like somebody banging on a can. Absolutely horrible, critically maligned, and commercially maligned. Everyone just didn't like it. So that came out in 2003. They had a space of 5 years, and then they brought out Death Magnetic, which was proclaimed as the return to form, the return to the roots. So you've got all these tracks on this album. The totality of the album runs for 72 minutes. So it's, there is a sort of, sonically, it does sound like it's going back to the olden days, but it's not quite, because in the early days, and I'm talking about Kill 'Em All, you didn't have songs that went for 9 minutes or 10 minutes. You might have 1 or 2 tracks, but the average track on this album is about 8 or 7 minutes, and it just takes its time to get where it's got to go. So whereas they're doing an apology album, and I can't see it as anything other than an apology album, let's get back to our roots. Let's get our fan base, the old fan base, back. But at the same time, they haven't quite got there. And it's been the same problem with subsequent albums, like Hardwired to Self-Destruct is a very, very long album, and so is 72 Seasons. Now, last saw Metallica with the Death Magnetic tour in 2008 in Sydney, and the majority of tracks that they did was the early stuff, the first couple of albums, a smattering of the Black Album, because you've got to have that, and then all of Death Magnetic, about 5 or 6 tracks. All the rest of it was ignored. Hardly any. I can't recall Load or Reload. Somebody will look it up and say, oh, Peter, you're wrong. But look, my memory, it was a lot of the early stuff, Black Album, and then Death Magnetic. So this is a test case that there was just so much shit thrown at them around Sananga and around that 90s period that I think clearly they were listening and let's get back to the roots. And this is when you've got a band that's evolving and have changed their sound and the optics so much, it's a bit predictable, and it always seems to happen. And this is what this band did, Metallica with Death Magnetic 2008. I think it's clearly their Please Forgive Me album. Any thoughts on this one, Reed? I know you haven't had much to do with Metallica. You've told me with their later catalogue.
Yeah, I really stopped listening to Metallica after the Black Album. And not because I didn't like it. It was exactly the opposite of that. I was a huge Metallica fan. And after listening to the Black Album, I went, they will never get any better than this. And just, I stopped listening to them. And I would dip my toe in occasionally because I heard rumors of how bad Saint Anger was. And I listened to a couple of songs from it and went, how could any professional band, let alone a band of their stature, put out an album that sounds this terrible?
Yeah.
With a straight face.
Yeah.
Just bizarre. But I have not heard a single track off of Death Magnetic or 72 Seconds or whatever the one that was in the middle. So,
but the last 3 albums, they're definitely trying to get back to that old sound, but they haven't quite nailed it. And I think one of the key elements is the length of the albums. They're too long. And I've got this theory, and I said this on a show to Martin Popoff. Peter Kerr's thrash album should not go any more than 35 to 40 minutes. 72 minutes is just too long for a thrash album. It should be short, direct, and, on with the show.
I think it's inherent in the word thrash. You don't thrash for an hour. Thrash is short, intense.
Yep. I think the human brain doesn't have the capacity to process music in one sitting of that nature for 72 minutes. It's just too much, and it's a little bit indulgent. And I can't tell you, I'd be a millionaire every second person when I've asked, what do you think about Hardwire and To Self-Destruct? And they say, oh, I'd make a great single album. It's a cliche, isn't it? But yeah, so many people have said that. Anyway, enough of my yakking. That's the first one, Metallica. I mean, I could have talked about the documentary. I could have talked about the Napster. I could have talked about a lot of there was just a lot of controversy that was around Metallica in the late 90s. And I just think that it all accumulated into this album, that they had to do some sort of a peace treaty, some sort of a Please Forgive Me. So that's my pick. Over to you, Reed. What's your next pick?
Okay, well, I'm going to call an audible on my own plans here because I'm going to go with the band that has always, for better or worse, been following in Metallica's shadow, and that's going to be Megadeth. So, Megadeth, again, sticking with my own preferences, I love Megadeth, and I prefer Megadeth to Metallica. And I think they had a string of classic albums. I'm not super fond of their first album. I think it just sounds cheap, which is not their fault. Those early Combat albums were simply cheap. I mean, they were made for like $10,000 in bottom of the barrel equipment in somebody's literal garage. I mean, they were shoestring affairs. But peace sells, but who's buying? So Far So Good, So What, Rust in Peace. All of a sudden my middle-aged brain is going to kick in and I'm not going to be able to remember all of them, but I love all the way up even through Euthanasia. Those albums just get better and better and better, but every one of them is not quite as successful as the Metallica album that comes out at the same time. And it's just like this constant thorn in Dave Mustaine's side that he can't quite match Metallica's success. And of course, their biggest album just happens to come out right after the Black Album. And nothing was ever going to match the Black Album. The Black Album was a once-in-a-generation album. No one was going to match that. So trying to compare yourself to that was a fool's game, but that's what he had. And then after Euthanasia, Countdown to Extinction. Holy crap. Okay, so Countdown to Extinction is Megadeth's best-selling album, but it's outsold 5-1 by the Black Album. After that, Megadeth starts getting less heavy with every album, right? Their next album's Euthanasia. It has a couple of, pop is the wrong word. Still, it's heavy metal, but it's getting more accessible. And then they have Cryptic Writings, which is even more accessible. And as Dave Mustaine put it in an interview one time, he had a song which reached number 2. Now, I think this was on the rock chart. He never had a song that charted yet on the Hot 100. But he had a song that reached number 2, and he was pissed that he couldn't reach number 1. Dan Huff, who was a major pop producer and country producer and session guitar player in Nashville, is producing their albums. And Dave decides, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get that number 1 that has eluded me. And I even remember in the interviews that came out with this album, Risk, he said, there's really 2 paths you can go with heavy metal. You can go heavy metal, or you can go heavy metal hard rock. And the exact comparison he used was Fleetwood Mac. This album shipped with a DVD of interviews where he compared himself to Fleetwood Mac. I want you to imagine that. Megadeth, the guitar player, singer, primary songwriter for Megadeth, is comparing himself to Fleetwood Mac. Needless to say, this album went over like a Led Zeppelin with almost all Megadeth fans and absolutely failed to reach any kind of new audience. Nobody was interested in a band named Megadeth if they weren't already heavy metal fans, and he totally alienated his heavy metal audience. So, failure all the way around. It has a couple of decent songs on it. He said for years, that was a pretty good album. If we had put a different name on it, it would have succeeded. I really doubt that. Regardless, their next album, he goes back to basics. Marty Friedman leaves the band. They hire session whiz kid, used to be in Savatage and Asia, a man named Al Petrelli, using the short-lived Widowmaker project with Dee Snider. And they put out The World Needs a Hero. Just compare these 2 covers here and tell me that one of them is not an apology for the other cover.
Yep, I can see that. Yes.
So it's a very traditional Megadeth album. Unfortunately, by this point in his career, Dave Mustaine is simply no longer... we grow as people. When Dave Mustaine was a young, heavily drug-addicted, abused, very angry young man, he wrote very different songs than he wrote as a guy in his mid-30s who is now a millionaire, who had everything he wanted, had toured the world multiple times and was very successful. You simply are not going to produce the same art. You're not the same person. I get it. It doesn't matter. It's a very different output from
Yep.
the guy.
Yep.
But he tried. That's the important thing. He tried. He produced a very middle of the road record, but he was trying to produce a very traditional Megadeth record, and it's okay. It's a hell of a lot better than Risk.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question? With the Apology album, do you think he sort of got that fan base back, or
No,
irrevocably he lost the audience with Risk?
They came back not during this album, but on the next album. And there's a whole long kind of story about that. We could talk a long way about that, but he started his own festival, Gigantour.
Mm.
And there's a whole thing about he fell asleep with his arms over the back of the chair and pinched off his nerves in his arm and thought he couldn't play guitar anymore. And there was this big story about how he was giving up music, and then he wasn't giving up music, and he was going to break up the band, and then didn't break up the band. And all of that eventually wound up with the new entity that we have as Megadeth, and that brought back some of his audience, but they've never been more than a shadow of their former selves.
Absolutely. Well, that's another thing, folks. With the Apology album, sometimes the damage is done and you can't bring back the fan base, because once you've done, it's like one strike and you're out. Very unforgiving. Just like the Metallica one. I don't think they've quite got that old fan base. I'm talking about the Kill 'Em All era. But that's a great example. And just my 5 cents, I actually like the first album, Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. It's scrappy, it's garage sounding, a lot of energy, it's phonetic. I've always had a soft spot for that album. I like it a lot. But great example. It's a good one. All right, I'm going to go to one of the titans of heavy metal. So again, another legendary band, and I'm going to talk about Judas Priest. Now, Judas Priest have actually may have put out a couple of apology albums. I'll talk about the main one. I'm talking about Painkiller in 1990. So Judas Priest in the 80s or the late 80s put out Turbo, and more acutely, they put out Ram It Down in 1988. Now, Ram It Down didn't make any fans of anybody. Horrible cover version of Johnny B. Good. It had drum machines. Dave Holland was being pushed out, and it just sounded very dated. Reed, it was in 1988, but it sounded like could have been done like 10 years earlier. And they were trying to go for this pop sound. They were trying to water things down. A lot of bad decision making, but whatever the outcome, Ram It Down is definitely not top tier Judas Priest. 1990, they put out Painkiller. Scott Travis is brought into the band with the double kick drum, and instantly it's just got a fast, phonetic, furious sound. And they're trying to compete with the big boys, and they're trying to compete with everything that's in metal at that particular time. I'm talking about your Slayers. I'm talking about your Megadeths, your Panteras. They're trying to do this really uber aggressive sound, and it's a critical success. It only goes gold. So they get some of their fan base back, but they don't get that fan base that bought 3 million copies of Screaming for Vengeance and maybe 2 million of Defenders of the Faith. And this is an example where they've made a bit of a blunder with Painkiller and maybe Turbo, but they haven't rescued all of the audience in the preceding albums. Painkiller, it's a great album. It's heavy, it's fast, it's furious. It's just got a wall of sound. But I think this is a prime example of an apology album. On one count, it's apology album, but on the other count, it's trying to compete with the big boys. So maybe at one stage, Judas Priest could have been seen as innovators, but in this album, they're kind of running with the pack and keeping up with the pack. So it's not only an apology album, it's let's keep up with the big boys. Let's keep up with everything that's happening. So any thoughts on this one before I go to the other apology album?
Oh, no, Painkiller, probably my favorite Priest album. But I definitely agree. Judas Priest's glory days were really on their first 3 or 4 albums. By the time you hit the new wave of British heavy metal, I think they were followers. I'm sorry, but they were absolutely Sad Wings of Destiny and Stained Class and Killing Machine. They were right out front, and after that, they got lapped by all of the people that they influenced, and they were playing catch up for the rest of their career, and they still are. I mean, bless them for still being out there doing it, and everybody loves that new single that they just put out. It's getting great reviews, but they'll never be innovators again.
Yeah. But look, this is the apology album. Now, there's another apology album that they did. So in 1981, Point of Entry, it was a little bit experimental. There was different instrumentation. There were different arrangements. I had kind of a pseudo kind of ballad, power ballad. It was very, very different to the preceding British Steel. So after that, they put out Screaming for Vengeance in 1982. And that was really absorbing everything that was in American rock at that time. In hair metal, or maybe just preceding hair metal. It had that loud American FM rock sound, you got another thing coming, all that sort of thing. So to me, that's an apology album, because Point of Entry was a little bit of a flop commercially or comparative to British Steel, and also it wasn't a fan favorite. So I think Judas Priest during their career, it probably put 2 definite apology or please forgive me albums, and I think it's Point of Entry and Painkiller. So there you go.
All right. Say though, Solar Angels, I have always been fond of Solar Angels off of Point of Entry.
Yeah, or very experimental, but the public just didn't take to it anyway.
No, they did not.
All right, what's your next pick?
All right, so I decided, after putting together a whole stack of other albums, and I've got a lot of honorable mentions to go through here real quick when we get through with this, to have a little fun with this concept. So my final artist is somebody his final pick is an apology to himself. So this is an artist that Peter and I have discussed multiple times on this channel. We always enjoy discussing him, and I am talking about the one, the only Mr. David Bowie. So, David Bowie hated his own 1980s output. He started off with Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, which was an album he loved and referred to for the rest of his career. Every time he put out an album, he was like, this is great. It reminds me of Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, which it never did, by the way. And I always thought that was hilarious, that was the point of reference that he always used, and he was always wrong. But he hated Let's Dance, Tonight, and Never Let Me Down. He considered those his sellout albums. He considered those his artistic nadir. And I'm like, people, between those albums, he sold about 15 million copies in the 80s. I don't even know how many he's sold since the 80s, but in the 80s, he sold about 15 million copies. And I got some just quick stats. That was double platinum for Let's Dance. This is just in the US. You can look up your own stats from whatever country you're in. Double platinum for Let's Dance, platinum for Tonight, gold for Never Let Me Down. There were 6 top 40 singles, 3 top 10 singles, and 1 #1 song with Let's Dance. And I'm not talking, if you go to the top rock charts, the hot rock charts, it's even more. But if I'm talking Hot 100, so these are pop songs. Let's Dance was the #1 song in America. So these were huge albums. And think of how many pop stars would sell a kidney to have that level of success as the worst part of their creative lives, right?
100%, yeah.
But nonetheless, David Bowie considered that a creative failure. So, as an apology to himself, he put together a little project called Tin Machine. So he got together with a previously unknown guitarist named Reeves Gabrels and the Sales Brothers, the sons of comedian Soupy Sales. They had played, I think, I haven't looked heavily into the history of the Sales Brothers, but I think they had played with Iggy Pop. And they put together this band, which was going to be a band. Bowie was adamant that this was not going to be a David Bowie project. And they were going to do everything absolutely democratically. 100%. They were going to vote on everything. It was going to be split 4 ways. Everybody was going to be an equal partner. And let me tell you, this was a stupid ass decision. Tin Machine has people that love. It's like anything in Bowie's catalog. Look, Bowie had a lot of albums, and they vary wildly in tone and style and quality. And I don't care where you throw a dart into that catalog, it's going to be somebody's favorite and somebody's least favorite. And Tin Machine is the exact same way. Some people love it and some people hate it. There are songs on this album that I love, and there are songs that I skip every time. And it's all because they put no thought into it. Bowie was forced to ad-lib his lyrics in the studio, which is why it's got some of the worst lyrics that Bowie ever did, because he was just off the top, straight off the dome, as the kids used to say in the 80s. Do the kids still say that? I have no idea. I don't know what the kids say these days.
No,
anyway,
I don't think they do. But anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, I don't know why they wouldn't let the man edit his lyrics, but they just, whatever he came up with behind the microphone is what made it onto the album. And the fact that he came up with anything that's worth listening to is a testimony to the man's creative output. And he actually has some worthwhile. He was particularly proud of "I Can't Read."
Yep.
I know that "Working Class Hero" and "Bus Stop" are ones that Reeves particularly likes.
Yeah.
So there are some songs on there that are worth listening to, but every single track on this album is one that would have benefited from time in the studio, polishing it up, letting Bowie sit down and think about his lyrics, and just spending some time crafting the songs instead of what you got, which was this weird experimental project. Nonetheless, there was a lot of excitement about this album. It sold really well. This was in the days when you couldn't just download anything. If you wanted to know what something sounded like, you bought it.
Yeah.
So people went out and they bought it, and nobody bought the follow-up. The second album was just a commercial flop, and there was no third album. I mean, they did put out a live album, but it sold even worse than the second album.
Yeah.
So, and then Tin Machine was dead at that point, and Bowie started putting out albums as David Bowie again. But that provided him the revitalization that he needed. So the apology to himself worked. May not have been that great for the rest of us, but it worked for him.
Yeah. Nice twist. Nice twist there, Reed. I really enjoyed listening to your take on that. I actually put down Heathen as an apology album because in the preceding albums to Heathen, Earthling and Outside were very experimental. And I don't think that maybe it might have had some critical appraisal, but I don't think the public really latched onto it. And Heathen was always regarded as where the critical and public fan base aligned. And to me, I think that may have been like a settling album where may have been a pseudo apology that maybe I was getting a little bit too obscure and a little bit too experimental and, bringing everyone back. But anyway, that's my interpretation of Bowie. Heathen would be my David Bowie apology album. All right, I'll quickly go through my next pick. Kiss. So, Unmasked, The Elder, Maligned. Unmasked, not in these parts of the world. It was actually, we were still in Kiss Mania and we were embracing Kiss in all its form. That was a huge hit, but Unmasked sunk like a stone in North America. Lower reaches of the top 100. I don't think they even toured Reed off the back of that album. And then, look, we've done plenty of shows about the Elder, either on the Contrarians or on this show. I don't even need to go into it, but it absolutely was a flopperoonie. It didn't do well, and both the critics hated it and the fan base left them in droves. So what did they come up with? They come up with an album which is ultra aggressive, hard-hitting, and it was definitely Please Forgive Me. And I'm talking about Creatures of the Night. Now, Creatures of the Night is probably my top two Kiss. I oscillate between the debut because of the songs, not the production, and Creatures of the Night with the songs and the production, which I love. It's just slamming it. It's so hard. I wouldn't say it was their biggest selling album. It did trickle to gold eventually, and the tour that was run off the back of it, they were still playing to kind of 40%, 30% capacity. But it's definitely where you've got a sense of the band saying, we've got to do something. We've got to get back to what we sounded like, and with a little extra twist of being a little bit more hard and heavy, which was the sounds of 1983, or the year it came out. So that's my Please Forgive Me, Creatures of the Night. And, this whole concept of Please Forgive Me, or the apology album, there's a certain contrivance. It's very contrived. There's a lot of calculation. It's not, Reed, that it's organic, that we go in and it ends up like that. I actually feel that Kiss may have, I get the feel that they had a committee meeting, and there's a lot of, table thumping between Gene and Paul, and come on, guys, we've got to get back to our roots. We've got to rock out, because that last album stank. So Creatures of the Night, that's my apology album. Any quick thoughts on that one?
Sure. I had pretty much thought you were going to do that one, so I have a stack of Kiss CDs here. I think Kiss has multiple apology albums. So you have Creatures of the Night after The Elder and Unmasked. I think you've also got Revenge as an apology for
Yes.
Hot in the Shade and Crazy Nights. You've got Psycho Circus as an apology for the makeupless years.
Yes.
Like it's like they're apologizing for all of the 80s at the same time by putting out Psycho Circus. Even though I don't think Psycho Circus is a particularly good album.
Yep. But another thing, Reed, for all their bravado, I've never heard a band that is so critical of a big chunk of their discography than Kiss.
Right.
There is so many albums that you hear Paul Stanley or Gene just put shade on it. There's a lot of artists, even if, they may secretly think, oh, it was a stinker, it wasn't good. They sort of pump up the tires, but Kiss are just shamelessly just say, no, that was a disaster. We shouldn't have done it. And a big portion of the 80s is in that category.
Yeah. Who I absolutely love talking about Kiss in the 80s, and I know that you have to wrap this up soon, but is Bruce Kulick. He is such a booster for Kiss in the 80s, and he's like, even, doesn't matter if you're talking about Hot in the Shade or Crazy Nights, because he's like, I played my butt off on that album. Played my butt off.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you go, man. You did play your butt off on that album.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. What's your final pick?
We're doing another? Okay, I'm going to throw this out then real quick. Another favorite, Bruce Dickinson. So, Bruce is really struggling as a solo artist. He's left Iron Maiden after Fear of the Dark, which was a really tepid album with, frankly, one great song. Well, one song that stayed around in the catalog. People in America still argue about how great it is. People in non-English speaking countries love it because it became the first ultimate Iron Maiden sing-along song, right? Fear of the Dark. So, Bruce has struggled. He decides he loves heavy grunge, specifically Soundgarden. He loves Soundgarden. So he hooks up with producer Jack Endino. Jack Endino produced an early EP for Soundgarden. He produced Bleach for Nirvana. He produced albums for Mudhoney. He's still producing albums. Well, he produced albums up till 2021. Produced dozens and dozens of albums. And he produces this weird little number called Skunkworks. And if you don't think this is Bruce's grunge album, this is when Bruce cut his hair. And he had a completely different album. There's videos, a concert video he put out of this. It is absolutely Bruce doing grunge. An Englishman's version of what he thinks grunge should sound like. It's really almost like a Soundgarden tribute album. And, when it came out, I hated it. I was not ready for it.
Yep.
I'll admit it. It's my fault. I was not ready for it. I love it now. It took me years to grow into it, but now I love it. The point being, though, it killed his career. It died. No one else, at least in America, I don't know how it landed in England, but certainly no one here was ready for it. But then he got back with Roy Z, and Roy was like, Bruce, you just need to do heavy metal, baby. That's Metal 101. What you need to do is Accident of Birth.
Yes.
Check out that album cover by Derek Riggs, the same guy who did Eddie. Look at that, man. It's a puppet on a cross. That's some confrontational stuff right there.
Yeah.
And
did it sell? Did it sell?
No, but it rocks. Well, none of Bruce's solo albums sold, but it is fantastic.
Yeah.
And,
did the Tattooed Millionaire sell?
It sold a little bit,
but that would be the biggest selling out of his solo discography, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but he was, of course, he was still in Maiden when that happened.
Yeah.
So he had the benefit of it wasn't a true solo album. It was an album that was by the singer of Iron Maiden as opposed to by solo artist Bruce Dickinson.
So you had a little bit of
different thing.
Had a bit of cross marketing, to pump up the tires.
Yeah. By the way, new Bruce Dickinson solo album coming out early 2024. I cannot wait. Yeah,
well, that's a rabbit hole that I'd like to get into because I've only heard a couple of Bruce Dickinson albums, but I know that you on the Contrarians have appraised a lot of Bruce Dickinson's, and I've really enjoyed you talking about it. So I'm going to definitely explore that. All right, thank you for that. I've just got a couple of quick sort of honorable mentions. I know we went into a fourth pick, so it's actually honorable mentions. Scorpions, Humanity Hour 1. That was where it was like a concept album co-written with an outside writer, Desmond Child. I'm talking Bon Jovi, Desmond Child, same guy. Right. Sonically, there was hardly any guitar solos. It was all down tuning, very much new metal sounding. And the follow-up album was the Apology album, which they actually said was going back to their roots, and that was Sting in the Tail. So that's an example. Rolling Stones, Dirty Work. So you got that lurid album cover where they're all wearing the Miami Vice suits. The band was fighting. Mick and Keith weren't getting on. Harlem Shuffle was their number one. It was the big song, which is, kind of a cover song. It wasn't a very good album. And about 4 years later, they put out Steel Wheels, and that was like a traditional Rolling Stone album. It was a comeback of sorts, and to me, I think it was a bit of a Please Forgive Me album. So that's just a couple of quick ones. So
let's see if I had any other. You can consider comeback albums kind of a type of apology, like Deep Purple's Perfect Strangers.
My favorite comeback album of all time. I love it. I don't know if it's an apology album, but yeah, maybe.
And again with Bruce Dickinson, Brave New World. We're sorry we got rid of Bruce and had 2 albums with Blaze.
Yeah, I like your thinking. I like your thinking.
Blaze Bailey.
Yeah, absolutely. As always, Reed, pleasure to have you on the channel. We'll do plenty more shows. You can see Reed on the Contrarians, and just look up Rock Daydream Nation. He's on a ton of shows, and there'll be a ton of future shows that we'll do. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Click the bell. It all helps with creating a community. We cover all different types of rock. So, you know, you don't like heavy metal, I'll talk about new wave. You don't like new wave, we'll talk about punk. We cover it all. So, but one thing's for sure, you'll see me and Reed on a show very soon. Cheers.